It was a summer of 1989 in a quiet, middle-class suburb just outside of Dallas, Texas. The kind of neighborhood where children played until the streetlights came on, where neighbors waved across freshly trimmed lawns, and where people left their doors unlocked at night. It was a kind of place where crime felt distant, something that happened in the headlines of big cities, never in a neighborhood where everyone seemed to know each other. But that illusion shattered one July evening. On July 12, 1989, a phone call to the Dallas County Sheriff's Office changed everything. A young woman named Laura Bennett, only 26 years old, was found brutally murdered in her own home. She lived alone in a small, single-story house just 2 doors down from a family with children she babysat on weekends. Laura was known as cheerful, responsible, and dependable. She was the last person anyone thought could become the victim of a violent crime in such a safe neighborhood. What made the crime particularly unusual wasn't just the violence, it was how close to home it all seemed. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing valuable was taken. And perhaps most disturbing of all, her neighbors reported hearing nothing. Not a scream, not a struggle, not a single sound on the night she was killed. At first, investigators leaned toward the idea of a targeted attack. Maybe Laura knew her killer. Maybe she had let them inside willingly. That alone was chilling, because it meant the person responsible could have been someone she trusted, someone she waved to in the mornings, or even someone she considered a friend. As detectives canvassed the neighborhood, they quickly uncovered an unsettling detail. Multiple neighbors mentioned that Laura had been uneasy in the weeks leading up to her death. She had told a co-worker she felt watched when she came home from work at night. Another friend recalled her mentioning a shadowy figure lingering near her backyard fence. But she brushed it off as paranoia. After all, this was a friendly neighborhood. The police dug deeper into Laura's life, but nothing pointed to a clear suspect. She had no known enemies, no jealous ex-lovers, and no financial troubles. On the surface, she was an ordinary young woman living an ordinary life. But the inconsistencies started piling up. First, there was the timeline. Laura had spoken with her mother on the phone at 9:30 p.m., sounding completely normal. By 10:15 p.m., when a neighbor drove by, her porch light was still on, but something seemed off. The front door was slightly ajar. And by 11 p.m., Laura was dead. That meant whoever killed her had acted in less than 90 minutes in a house surrounded by watchful neighbors. Then came the fingerprints. Investigators found prints on the inside of Laura's back door, but they didn't match anyone in her circle. Not family, not friends, not neighbors. Forensic teams struggled to identify the mysterious prints, and with DNA testing still in its infancy in 1989, there was little they could do beyond comparisons in local databases. Nothing came up. The neighborhood grew tense. People who had left their doors unlocked now double-bolted them. Curtains were drawn tight at night. Children were no longer allowed to play freely in the street. Fear gripped the community, but the case seemed to grow colder with each passing week. And then came the first twist. A neighbor, Charles Chuck Harris, a 34-year-old mechanic who lived right next door to Laura, stepped forward with new information. He told police he'd seen a suspicious car parked near her house around 10 p.m. the night of the murder. He described it as a dark blue sedan, older model, with tinted windows. Police followed up, but there were no leads. Still, Chuck's cooperation made him appear helpful, even trustworthy. Neighbors praised him for coming forward. But detectives noticed something strange. Chuck inserted himself into the investigation repeatedly. He asked officers about evidence, speculated on how Laura might have died, and often lingered near her property during the investigation. It struck some detectives as odd, but without hard evidence, suspicion remained just that, suspicion. Months passed, and the case grew colder. But then, in early 1990, a chilling discovery turned everything upside down. A woman in a nearby town reported a break-in at her home. She wasn't harmed, but the intruder left behind clear fingerprints. When police processed them, they matched the same unidentified prints from Laura Bennett's house. And guess what? The prints belonged to none other than Chuck Harris, the helpful next-door neighbor. The revelation was earth-shattering. The man who had seemed concerned, the man who had offered helpful tips, was now the prime suspect in Laura's murder. Investigators learned that Chuck had a disturbing history, one that wasn't widely known in the neighborhood. Years earlier, He had been arrested for stalking an ex-girlfriend but was released due to lack of evidence. He had also been fired from a previous job after threatening a female co-worker. As detectives pieced together his background, a terrifying picture began to form. Chuck lived less than 20 feet from Laura's front door. He could see when she left for work, when she came home, and when she was alone. Neighbors later recalled that Chuck often asked casual questions about Laura, whether she was dating, who she spent time with, or what her schedule was like. At the time, no one thought much of it, but in hindsight, it all seemed sinister. Still, even with the fingerprints, the case was not airtight. Chuck insisted he had been in Laura's home before, claiming she once asked him to fix a leaky pipe in her kitchen. It wasn't impossible. Neighbors often helped each other in small ways, but Laura's closest friend swore she never mentioned letting Chuck inside her house. The trial of public opinion began to split. Some neighbors couldn't believe the friendly mechanic they'd known for years could be a killer. Others felt uneasy, remembering the small red flags they brushed aside. And then came the second twist, one that shook even the investigators. As police dug deeper, they discovered that Laura's murder wasn't the only unsolved crime in the area. In the past 5 years, 3 other women within a 20-mile radius have been killed under suspiciously similar circumstances. No forced entry, sudden violence, and minimal evidence left behind. At the time, each case had been treated separately. But now, with Chuck's name in the mix, detectives began to wonder, had the quiet neighborhood mechanic been hiding a much darker secret all along? The investigation into Chuck's possible connection to the other murders grew, but before police could close in further, Chuck vanished. One evening in March 1990, his truck was found abandoned near a rest stop off Interstate 35. Inside were his wallet, a half-empty pack of cigarettes, and a blood-stained rag. But Chuck himself was gone. To this day, some believe he fled town to avoid capture. Others think he may have taken his own life. And still others whisper that he might have had help, that someone in the neighborhood knew more than they were willing to admit. What no one disputes is this: the friendly neighbor next door wasn't who he seemed to be. And the question that still haunts investigators is, if Chuck Harris was indeed the killer, how many more victims might there be? The answers may lie buried in old case files, or in the memories of those who lived on that quiet Dallas street. But one thing is certain: the story of the killer next door is far from over.